Hi, my name is Ngina.
And I'm Mehek.
And we are the
Disruptors.
Disruptors. This isn't just history, it's Kenya's story, unruly, untamed, untold. In this season, we're going to be focusing on the post independence political assassinations. It's stories filled with a lot of suspense, a lot of drama, a lot of power plays. So get comfortable, stay curious, and enjoy.
So, standing on Ronald Ngala Street right now is a large bronze statue of a man who was ultimately one of the most illustrious politicians in Kenya's history, Ronald Ngala. I've actually seen his statue multiple times because my place of worship is right next to it. So every Sunday when I pass by, I actually look towards that road to just see him standing there. But his story is quite intriguing when you decide to dig deeper. Teacher turns politician and then dies extremely mysteriously. Some say bees, others say witchcraft, others say poison. But we'll definitely get into that later. So for that, we're going to have to go all the way back to 1922.
Yeah.
We're not sure of the day or the month Ngala was born because not many people from that time do know their exact birth rates. But accordingly, he was born in 1922 in
what we now know as Kilifi.
In what we now know as Kilifi. And Ngala was actually born in a very humble background. His dad was a carpenter, and they didn't really have much formal education. They were also victims of the British settlement programs. They were displaced from their home and eventually had to move into those very, very tiny settlements later on in life. And Ngala kind of was described as this very silent kid, funny enough. For a politician, he was described as being extremely silent when he was in school. His friends said he wasn't exactly scholarly gifted. However, he was very extremely focused, like he was locked in. So he was always focused on his studies. He refused to let a task remain unfinished. And it says that he would even miss his meals until his tasks were not, done with. And I think that really helped him become a really good student. So Ngala starts his education in Kaloleni. He's in primary school that's run by a white man at that point. Funny enough, his headmaster was like, this guy's going to be great, right?
Yeah.
But others were like, the quiet kid? Not really. But the thing about Ngala is, you'll realize, is he was very strong, headstrong, focused. And he was known to walk to school for 3 kilometers. You know those stories our parents used to tell us. I traversed the entire continent to go to school. I fought off snakes and
I was barefoot.
I swam through rivers. Yeah, that was Ngala's story of going to school every day. And he actually passed with really good grades from his primary education. And this is where things get a little funny for me. So Ngala had started working to provide for his family. His father was ailing, and he, decided to take up the role of the man of the house. And when he finished his primary education, there was a lot of influence from, first, of course, his family. They were like, maybe instead of doing further education, how about you continue pursuing a job and support the family further? And then his teachers, who were all missionaries, were actually trying to convince him to not even bother about further studies. Quite an interesting thing for the missionaries to be doing. But that's what they did. They were trying to convince him. But Ngala realized that the education is, the key to his future. So he decides that I am going to actually continue pursuing my further studies, which, of course, his family took in grace. And they're like, of course, we will support you. And so Ngala finds himself in Alliance. One of the most illustrious schools in the country, have given us big names, and he made friends with.
So he made very many friends. Some of them he was with at Kaloleni, who didn't really see him as someone who's going to go far. They just saw him as a silent, tiny kid in school.
Yeah.
So he found himself in Alliance High School, and the system back then was very. What's the term? The system was very inferior, especially for the African child. And so there was an examination that you had to take in Form 2. So that to determine whether you can continue studying. And I think
That was messy.
yes, I think it was messy. I think it was weird, because why would you stop the education of an African child?
Exactly.
And also, why is it that the British government and the missionaries, why were they so threatened about an African being educated,
Exactly.
that they had to put all these hurdles in place? Ngala did not care. Ngala was focused. He knew the goal. He knew what he wanted. And so he decided to just push, right? So he sat the exam, which he actually later comes to say that exam needs to be abolished.
Yep.
It's only there to make Africans feel more inferior, which is wrong. Africans can read. He's a believer of education.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he does the Form 2 exam and passes. And he continues his studies, and he's done with all his papers, and he joins Makerere University.
That's true, to be a teacher.
Yes. Now, funny enough, the reason why he ended up taking teaching as a course was not even his own personal bidding. Back then, the colonial government was the one to tell you, yeah, we need more manpower in this, we need more skills in this, and so they tell Kenyans, go study this.
Do you think our parents co-opted that role by telling us you have to be a doctor, you have to be an engineer? Like, I'm just saying, if the white man is deciding who's doing what, do you think our parents were like, yeah, that one makes you more money, join that?
Yeah, we can see why maybe they have that kind of thinking, or had that kind of thinking. So he was told to go study, do a diploma in teaching.
For 3 years.
For 3 years. A diploma. That's absurd. But yeah, so he ended up taking teaching in Makerere University. So just a question, what were you doing at 21?
Hey, I was struggling through university during the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. But for Ronald, at only 21 years of age,
oh, I can hear it.
He started having the pressures of life. He started getting pressures of life. Just like every other
No, I need to jump into
black
this one.
or brown family.
I have to get into this
yes,
one.
take it away.
This is where I felt the most connected to Ngala when I was reading his story. At 21, he starts getting emotionally blackmailed by his grandmom that she wants to see her sweet grandson married. At 21, I think a lot of brown and black kids who are watching this are going to be like, yeah, I get that one a lot.
Yeah.
Because I was like 17 when the pressure started. He was 21 and I'm about to be 25. It's going to get worse.
Yeah.
We've all been there. I have been emotionally blackmailed. Oh, we're old. We want to see you again. Why don't you get married? Just visit me. But I guess Ngala was like, huh? What is happening? Mind you, he hadn't yet finished his education. He was still in Makerere. He's still pursuing his degree. And on top of that, there's a very pressing matter. So from the outside, Ngala and his wife-to-be Esther, they kind of had that friends to lovers kind of vibe of their story because their family were good friends. It was known that they were very sociable with one another and had grown up with one another. So when Ngala was opposed to the marriage, both sides were like, we don't get it. Why are you so opposed? This is someone someone you've grown up with, you know them. It should be very easy to transition into a bond like marriage.
Yeah.
But Ngala was like, I am in university. I am doing my college. And Esther at that point in time had not finished past 7th grade or 7th standard. And he's like, I can't be with someone who's not as educated, or at least that's the vibe you kind of get. He's like, and I kind of get it.
Yeah.
I have a degree. I personally don't think I would want to be with someone who doesn't have one, but I get it. The idea of education opens your mind to so many things. And I think that's what Ngala was also looking for. And actually, he was very supportive of Esther pursuing her education. And what he would go on to do was actually pay for her education all the way to Form 2. When we had those papers at that time, he was still working at that point, and he decided that he would be able to fund some of her education. And he did, actually. So Esther ends up studying all the way to Form 2. Perfect. And I think by the age of 24, 25, Ngala is married, he's settled down with Esther, and he's almost finishing his degree at this point,
Yeah.
right? And it's actually really sweet because I think they have their first child, Katana, a few years later.
Literally a year after getting
Exactly,
married.
a year after getting married. So we can see Gala now, following the motions of life, studying, working, and married with a child. So Gala actually, when he graduates from Makerere, he comes back home to Kaloleni to teach, which I think a lot of teachers would relate to come back to the place that gave you so much. So Gala comes back to Kaloleni and starts to teach. And a lot of his students said he was strict. They used to say he was extremely, extremely strict. Ngala was very, very strong on discipline, on being focused. He wanted to instill his students with the same kind of views that he had. And by the way, at that time, he was earning 400 shillings a month.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money back
then. And considering he was now the father of the household, can you imagine how much he had to take care of not only his now nuclear family, but extended family, right? So he becomes a teacher, and he's growing. Ngala was so focused that even in his career, he had a very steady growth. But it's also around this time that his main issues were not political, they were more socioeconomic and the like. And he was very interested in culture and preserving this culture. He didn't like the idea of modernity. He felt like modernity was an African taking modernity that's been brought by the white man. He used to feel like that's you losing
your identity, your self-respect.
Yes.
Exactly.
And he actually uses the words losing self-respect. So around 1949, he writes a book and it's called Inchi na Desturi za Wagiriama. So what he does is literally just tell the stories of the different cultures in the community, in the Giriama community. So he tells the rites of passage. He talks about the music and the dances and what people hold dear. Like culture is literally the way of life. So he basically tells what the way of life is. And his main aim was to preserve the oral traditions. Africans are storytellers. That is so obvious. We like to yap. Our grandparents liked to yap. So it was his way of putting these things down so that people can remember, so that it's not forgotten. So, yeah, and then around, again, very focused man, he goes from Kaloleni, he's transferred all the way to Mbale. Mbale is now in what we now know as Vihiga County. So this was in 1950, January. So all the way from coast all the way to Vihiga. And now he even gets a higher rank. He becomes principal at Mbale. Yes. Then again, he, after a few years of just working and doing what he knows best, he is transferred again from Mbale to Buxton
in Mombasa.
And now this is where things start to change. We now see this eloquent orator and a teacher now start seeing things very differently. So
yeah. Gala's life at that point was quite interesting because he found himself at a conference, I think in Southern Rhodesia, so what we know as Zimbabwe right now. And the Africans over there were very, very curious at how Ngala could mingle with the white people as he did. Because it's really important to note that until this point, until the 1950s, Ngala wasn't interested in politics. He wasn't very into the whole politics. One of the reasons being, the politics of Coast were not the same as the politics of the rest of Kenya at that time. So even when he was at Alliance, mind you, this was in Central Province at that time, right? We have World War II, we have the Mau Mau, we have debates around colonialism going on. To Ngala, it didn't make much of an impact because where he came from, the issues of race, the issues of colonialism, as much as they were felt, it wasn't to a higher degree that was enough to, change his sentiments.
Yeah.
So we have a Ronald Ngala who is extremely devoted to education, to his life, and to his work also. He was also extremely religious. He did not want to mix Christianity with, he did not want to mix God with politics. So it was something that he didn't want to be a part of. And we kind of see that resistance when he joins CAA. It was an association in Coast that it wasn't a political one. It was more of a socioeconomic one where very literate people would get together and express views, right? Express the views of the African people, talk about the salary scale, the extreme racial bias, and a lot of conversation was going on, intellectual conversation, but it wasn't exactly political. So Ngala wasn't really getting into it. And funny enough, he does reject a political move coming very early on. So there was a coastal association called MADU, and Francis Kamisi, a legendary journalist and politician, was actually president of this association. And he recognized that Ngala could be a good leader.
Yeah.
Way back then. And he was like, hey, would you want to join me? Like, I would really like you to be there. But again, because Ngala did not want to mix God and politics, he was like, no, I'm okay. And eventually, because of a lot of insistence, he does agree to come on board, but not as a member, just as an observer. But this is now where like the political seeds slowly start to be sowed.
Yeah.
We see Ngala kind of sit on these meetings, listen to the grievances, and also like understand political jargon. And that's where we see him start to make very small steps into the political world at that time.
Yeah. And so when he's in this when he's now in this associations, in as much as he's getting all this political jargon, we also need to remember that he still his passion has always been education.
Yes.
And one of the things that he actually does around this time is that he is put on a board in around 1955 as well, where he's investigating problems around education of African children. And this is where now he tells the people to abolish that Form 2 exam.
Exactly.
Yeah, which was called the junior secondary examination back then.
I think I would cry if I had to do a paper in the middle of high school.
I know. You're already thinking for 844? For 844, you're already thinking about Form 4 and the stress of all that. So imagine having to do Form 2 and then another one, Form 6 or Form 4.
And that one determines whether or not you can continue as well. So that must have been very stressful.
Very. Yeah. They literally tell you, okay, you failed. Go work, go do something. Yeah. So around 1957 is now when he gets into full-time politics. This man is now a politician. Career change. But his passion, let's not forget that his passion will always be around education and preservation of culture. So 1957 comes in, and there's what Africans are feeling is that we need more representation in the LegCo, or as people would say, LegCo, or the Legislative Council. So what would happen back then would be...
So what would happen back then, and this kind of brings us to a lot of jargon, so just bear with us. So we have something called the Littleton Plan that was put forth by the colonial government. So it gave representation for Europeans and Asians at the time, very small for Asians and then a majority for Europeans, to, express their views politically, make political decisions, bills, whatnot. However, the representation for Africans was through a white man, which is absurd, right?
Yeah.
So here we are with this plan that really does make life difficult for the African populace in Kenya. And so we see the Legislative Council that's there already. We see a lot of people now start to actually vie for positions at LegCo, because it was easier to not easier, but being able to run for that post required from different constituencies. People could nominate someone. And so I think it's around 1957, 1958, where we see actually Ngala gets appointed to LegCo, which is a huge move. And there are other players also involved. We had Daniel Arap Moi, we had Tom Mboya, we had
Bernard Mate, we had James Muimi, we had Masinde Muliro, and Lawrence Oguda. And these people were just basically representing different places,
different counties,
different provinces.
Well, not counties, yes.
Yeah.
We were in provinces back then.
Different provinces in a way.
Yeah.
And this group now comes to form IMO. If you did 844, I'm very sure you've
heard this one.
You've had this term before. So basically, the job was just to show African representation in LegCo, and they were pushing. Not only were they pushing for that African, not only were they representing Africans, they were also now pushing for Jomo Kenyatta to be released, because this is when, things have fired up. State of emergency has been
in effect.
Yes, it has been in effect.
The trial
is done. People have been detained. They've stayed in there. It's now time to release them. It's time to also leave the state of emergency thing. Just go away. So it's around this time. So now this is what they're pushing for. And the reason why the colonial government was very much against it is because they feel like these people are going to get too strong. And their belief was that they were going to take back what they had taken. They were used to the settler land they had gotten. And it's actually described in a very interesting way that the white men were afraid for their spendthrift tendencies to come to an end.
Interesting.
I know, right?
Yeah. And they also didn't think that Africans were capable of representing themselves.
Yeah.
Which is why they actually did delay a lot of these progressive movements to take place. And then we kind of find ourselves with IMO and these leaders who can represent the people. And they do this thing where they all meet up one day. I believe it's on a Wednesday just after they have been appointed. And they declare the Littleton Plan null and void.
Yeah. They literally say, as we're not...
we're not taking part in this.
We're not taking part in this. We want something to represent us. The heck.
So, as they continue to reject this plan, which they do, they actually do start agitating for a lot of changes. They decide we need rule, we need the power, change of hands in power. We need more African majority representation, because according to them, all this was doing was, minimizing the kind of power, the kind of assembly that they could have in order to enact change. So they do declare it null and void, and they actually do manage to get it off the table completely.
Yeah.
But then it now brings in something that still makes my mind hurt, called the Lennox Boyd Constitution.
Yeah, and it's actually named after the man, Lennox Boyd.
Yep.
And the best way to describe this constitution would be to give them just a little bit, but not too much, so that we can still show them that we're still in control. And just something that you guys need to notice also, in as much as Ronald Ngala was very eloquent and all that, he was a very good negotiator. And Ngala decides, no, Lennox Boyd is honest. I'm trying not to curse. Lennox Boyd Constitution should not be
accepted.
Should not be accepted. Lennox Boyd, again, if you did SST or history, you know this constitution. And basically its main agenda was to increase African representation, but not give them independence. So Ronald Ngala is the one who led that fight against the Lennox Boyd Constitution and told them, no, this is just a way for you people to pull us back and slow us down. We are at a point as a country where we can get independence and we can represent ourselves. So don't give us a percentage. No, we want the full thing. Give us independence. And now this was now full-blown effect where everyone wanted Kenyatta out. Or around this time, the reason why they wanted Kenyatta out is because now the colonial government has also started asking each other questions. Who could be better fit to take presidency once they leave?
This is where it gets really messy,
yes.
Right? Because the white people do realize in the around this period, right? Late 1950s, early 1960s, the power change has to happen.
Yeah.
They cannot keep doing this because the struggle for independence was happening all over. and the British was starting to now lose ground. So of course it was a no-brainer for them. Yeah, we need to do it. But they were like, who do we pass on power to? They actually had three candidates.
Yeah.
Right? The first one and the most obvious one was Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, because he was already kind of seen as a central figure to the independence movement, as, the father of the nation, as we would get to know him after independence. But then there was also Tom Mboya.
Yeah.
Extremely eloquent, learned, and we will be discussing him in a next episode. And then we had Ronald Ngala. However, there's a lot of contention around Ngala becoming a president. Mind you, at this point, all these players are alive, right? This is very early on when these questions are being asked. But the reason for the contention around Ngala was he had a lot of influence, but especially in coast. So his power, his influence was mostly concentrated in the coastal province. So the British thought he might not be a good fit for a national leadership role. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, this influence in the coastal region is what will get him into a lot of problems as we continue. So, as we all know, the Lancaster House conferences start in the 1960s. Oh, wait, just before that, IMO was still a very good organization. And the Queen Mother in 1959, the Queen Mother from the UK, of course, they were our powers, basically, decides that she wants to come to Kenya for a visit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this is where we now start seeing that, of course, IMO had people who had the same vision for the country in terms of having independence and having our own leadership. But they had very different ways of going about these things.
Yeah.
And this is what gets Ngala into problems, and IMO actually weakening and dying off,
So,
actually.
To give context, IMO, because of what Gina has just explained, they kind of had cracks starting to show up.
Yeah.
But then the Queen Mother's visit kind of makes it more obvious in the rupture. So the plan was, according to the rest of the IMO leaders, was we boycott this. And in the sense of boycott was, I read in one of our sources, was not necessarily go and protest or go outside and voice your boycott, but stay home. Don't be a part of the celebrations. Don't be a part of anything to do with that visit.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, just silently back out. But Ngala was of a very differing view. And I think this is where now people would think he's a fence sitter. And this is kind of where also the whole, is Ronald Ngala a white man's stooge, kind of comes up.
Yeah.
Because we kind of see him be anti-boycott.
Yeah.
Which would be surprising, right? But Ngala's reasoning was, yes, we do not like the colonial rulers. We do not like what they're doing to us. And our fight, yes, is against them, but on a political level. So his argument was, the Queen doesn't really have that kind of
influence. She's just a ceremonial figure.
Yes, that's what he was kind of saying. And he actually publicly made these statements. And he made them in Coast. And what the aftermath of this, like, a lot of coastal associations started pulling out from the boycott. And they were like, oh yeah, we will take part in these celebrations, in, making sure she is treated well when she comes to visit. And other leaders were very stunned by this move.
Especially Mboya and Oginga.
Exactly. Because if you think about it, even if she's a ceremonial figure, as Ngala was putting it, she still was the sovereign ruler, right? Of all the colonial all the colonial entities, right?
Yeah.
Boycotting her would have made the most logical sense, because you are going against the representative of the colonial power. But because of his anti-boycott stance, the splinters start getting worse. The fractures are getting worse. And because of his influence in Coast, you're seeing them all be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. We are going to pull out. And that did not sit well with everyone else.
Definitely. I see both sides. But I feel like back then, if I was in that era,
you would boycott.
Definitely.
Yeah, me too. Me, first of all, it's
Definitely.
personal on both sides. So yeah.
Yeah, but again, this literally just highlights how Ngala was such a negotiator. He was more of a man, guys. We can take this slow. Let's talk about it. There's always a way for everyone. So anyway, so that was 1959. So 1960s come in, and now the discussions around Kenya getting independence have started. So the first Lancaster House Conference of 1960. So, whew,
Oh yes, Gala in London alongside Mboya.
Mboya, yeah, which by the way now starts causing a drift between these two friends. Ngala feels like the London press is giving Mboya more attention, and it made him feel sidelined as a leader. Like, why is Mboya the one to be there? But also around this time is when now again Kenya, in as much as they're getting it's so obvious independence is coming. We still had an identity crisis. Apart from the Cold War that was going on globally, there's also the issue of how do we want Kenya to be run. Just for context, in our African communities, just cultures, I remember we used to be taught that we had decentralized governments. And that's technically what Ngala pushed for. But on the other hand, Mzee Jomo wanted a centralized government where it was just one leader. So, and it's, they say he had a very, Ngala had a very federalistic view. And after the first Lancaster conference, it felt like maybe his way was not going to be the way. Jomo's way of House of Mumbi is what was going to take, what was going to lead the country into independence. And now us having him as the head and just every power being like the sense of unity just being around him and the community. The reason why Ngala felt this way is number one, in as much as we were getting independence, there was the issue of land. I mean,
oh yes,
and for him, it was very personal as well because yeah.
So just to note, there is about £12,000 the British government actually gave to us around the time for independence for the for land redistribution. And that money never saw the light of day. It is believed that the money went to Mzee Kenyatta's friends and family. And that's kind of where now the issue does come up for Gala. It's extremely personally because his own family were living in settlements, had been displaced.
Yeah, they had been displaced after the white man took 10 acres.
Exactly.
A whole 10 acres. So I completely understand that. And the reason why he wanted that kind of, it was called majimboism. Guys, not majimbo, just majimboism, as in tuishi kwa majimbo, Kiswahili. Anyway, so it was just around people to have their own. It was for him. He saw it as a way for people to basically be able to go back to where they were and land to be divided how it was before, so that people are able to get their land back. And till now, we do see that we still have issues of land in the country. So again, our very good negotiator, Second Lancaster House Conference in 1962, he actually negotiates and he wins. And it now seems like, oh wow, okay, so Kenya is going to gain independence. Was he? Yay. But we're also going to be a federalistic state. And we're going to have that decentralized kind of thing where every community, every ethnic community in the country will have its own leader to represent them, and we will be leading on that way. Let's just be honest, Mzee was not very happy about that. And it actually is seen when we come back to Kenya and we get independence. And by this time, we now have KANU, and Ngala was one of the founders of KADU. And funny enough, by 1964, there was no, like, in as much as we've negotiated and we're going to have majimboism, by 1964, all that had been pushed away. Yeah. And now we have Ngala, who's feeling some type of way, valid. In 1964, we're a republic. Oh, okay. It's like, okay, you guys have decided to take the centralized government way, I'm going to be in the opposition. So this is 1964. And there's a very main conference. Okay, so obviously Kanu has won the election. So he starts seeing people leave Kadu and going to Kanu. And this, in a way, weakens him, of course. In as much as he's now a minister in the government, there's a way he feels, because he feels like he's the only one fighting in the opposition. And in 1966, Limuru Conference, he decides to dissolve Kadu. And he actually says, what he says, I'm just paraphrasing, is that I'm going to take Kadu into government. And Mzee Kenyatta says, at last, there's no opposition for the sake of opposition. Amen.
Yikes. We've heard that one before.
Yeah. And that's basically how Kadu gets into Kanu. But one thing we need to realize now, in as much as he's in government, he ends up being in the ministry. He becomes a minister of power and communications. There's so much he's doing. In as much as he was a Kanu, he's now in Kanu, he always felt marginalized. He always felt sidelined, because Kanu, the loyalists of Jomo Kenyatta, felt like he was still...
they said he was nursing the Kadu hangover. Yeah, he was nursing a Kadu hangover.
Yes, and they felt like he was too... He wasn't looking at the future of the country the way they were seeing it. So he really struggled. And now this is just the 60s. Of course, he's in power, but he's feeling sidelined in Kanu. And honestly, I completely understand why. Yeah.
And we kind of also see, as much as he was a cabinet minister, he was holding all these positions, he kind of started getting a lot of flack from Mombasa at one point.
Yes.
They started questioning his leadership, and they felt like him being in power was them being sidelined. There was a lot going on, and it's kind of safe to say that Ngala was still trying to find his footing in, post-independence Kenya politically. And we kind of see that struggle continue. But he does try his best with whatever he gets. Yeah. I remember he was given a different ministry at one point that was barely funded. He barely had work, but he still tried his best. Yeah. And that was the one for power. But it all kind of ends very drastically, in a sense, around
1972.
So December of 1972, Jamhuri Day, the entire country is celebrating independence until a Voice of Kenya broadcast brings, solemnizes the whole event, the whole celebration. Ronald Ngala had been seriously injured in a car accident, and his condition is critical. That is the broadcast. And a lot of other broadcasts, a lot of other updates do follow after this. And each one of them is more confusing than the last.
Yeah.
Some of them say his condition is very critical. Others would go and say, he's fine. He's perfectly fine. He can be out tomorrow.
Yeah.
And due to this conflicting information that was coming in and out, people did not know what to think of what had happened to Ngala. At this point, they didn't even know, yes, there was a road crash. What was the cause of the accident? Who survived? What happened? Ngala's driver did survive, by the way. They were on their way to Mombasa.
Which actually brings a contest, an issue around that, because people are like, what was he doing going to Mombasa
on
Jamhuri Day? Ideally, he is meant to be going for the celebration.
Exactly.
Because he's a minister. Yeah. So this is where the questions started and the rumors started. And now imagine... rumors, media is also saying something very different.
But then it all comes to like a head. All these kind of come to a head on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
On Christmas Day of the same year, Ronald Ngala is announced dead.
Yeah.
And it causes a lot of turbulence in the country, in a sense, because there are a lot of unanswered questions surrounding his death. And actually, it comes to a point where they have to do an inquiry. And this is where things get crazy. Like it turns into a true crime investigative documentary. Ngala's car is brought, they decide to do an inquiry, right? They want to know, okay, what caused the accident? Theory number one, bees. Can we all just take that in?
Yeah.
Bees.
A swarm of bees.
So according to two witnesses, the driver was heard saying, and I'm going to butcher this, but he was heard saying gatata, which can either mean bees or wild beast. So they said that he said, I was trying to like swat away like a swarm of bees.
Yeah.
And that's how he caused, like the accident was caused. And, that led to Ronald Ngala's death. But then the driver during the inquiry goes, oh no, I didn't mean bees. I meant
wildebeest.
Wildebeest. There was wildebeest and I was trying to avoid them. So everyone was like, wait, what?
So wildebeest were literally running. And then he decides to swerve. And then the car rolls.
And he miraculously comes out alive.
Okay.
Good for him, I guess. But the other theory, which kind of, these are now like conspiracy theories that are making the rounds, right?
Yeah.
The second one is witchcraft. Witchcraft. So apparently there was rumors going around that he had been, what is it, bewitched? No, that's the wrong word. But yeah, basically someone performed witchcraft. It led to Ngala's death. And that's why the driver survived, I guess.
Yeah.
But then there's also the aspect of poison. So some people say he was poisoned. But this is where it gets worse. There's no way to prove any of these theories because, at least from our research, we weren't able to find any autopsy reports or anything that really clearly puts to, okay, if it was a road crash and there were bees, he must have been stung at some point. Were there bee stings? Or if it was poison, were there traces of poison?
Poison in his body.
It's harder to trace witchcraft, I guess, but
it's very stereotypical because this is, okay. Now, the funny thing is that now on his journey, he dies along Konza. Yes. And we all know the stereotypes around Kambas.
Yes.
The Kamba community and witchcraft. So I think the reason why almost so very many people were like, oh my God, yes, it could be witchcraft. Could probably be because of the stereotypes.
But then we also see, and during the inquiry, it also comes out that Songala's wife, Esther, his first wife, had been asked, because she had spoken to him, and he said that he is actually going to be in Nairobi, right?
Yeah.
However, when they speak to his second wife, yes, Ngala had a second wife, she said that she had spoken to him, but he said that he would be coming or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's all so confusing because, again, the question that was raised, why is he on his way to Coast during Jamhuri celebrations? That too on the day, right?
Yeah.
So unfortunately, Ngala's death is still a mystery to this day. It has been ruled as a road accident, but that's kind of where we are.
And he succumbed to his injuries.
And he succumbed to his injuries.
But let's talk about Kenya and what was going on in that time. So unfortunately, and this is going to be on our next episode, Tom Mboya's death just happens a few years before that. And we know that there's a lot of tensions. I think one thing people need to note is that in as much as Ngala and Mboya used to have very different views, ideologies, they still were very close. And even when Kadu came back, and Tom Mboya sadly, unfortunately, passed away, funny enough, supporters of Mboya went and backed up Ngala. So Ngala's death made the tensions in Kenya even worse because we already know after Mboya's death, there was a lot of tension and Kenyatta was very paranoid.
At this point.
Yes, because of course he had his loyalists, Charles Njonjo and the like. But now it's like, okay, so Mboya has passed. Okay, sawa sawa. And now Ngala has passed. And now Tom Mboya supporters are now backing Ngala. And you can see all the drama around that. So it's said that Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was very paranoid. He didn't really know who to trust in the government. He didn't know who was supporting who. And it's just this whole wave of things going on. So it's very interesting how till today it's still a mystery, but we can still see his impact.
Yes.
Actually, till date. funny enough, and I think it's something he would have been proud of in a way, is what he fought for.
Yes.
The majimboism is now what we now know as devolution, with the having counties and the like in the country. So he's technically, in a way, he's the father of devolution.
I mean, yeah, I guess we could say that.
Yeah.
And then now, again, his story does conclude with a monument at Ronald Ngala Street. We have a statue that was inaugurated. And that's kind of where we are right now with his story.
But we can always remember him as someone who, he
pragmatic,
very pragmatic,
educated,
negotiator,
and very focused. He was locked in. I think we all need to lock in like him.
Yeah. So this is just the story of literally rags to riches, in a sense. The stories we are told, soma kwa bidii, utakula, Big G, the like. I feel like that's the best way to describe Ngala, because he was a teacher, then got into politics, but he never forgot, like, his passion was teaching and educating, and it's something that he carried
for the rest of
his life. Him fighting for going to investigate problems with African studies and the African child. Him trying to fight, trying to abolish the education system that was very inferior and made Africans inferior to every other person. And also, I think the one thing I really loved about his story and I really connected to was his desire to preserve culture and the traditions that we have, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the story of Ronald Ngala. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us in today's discussion. As usual, all our sources will be linked in our description boxes and across all our social media platforms. And we look forward to engaging you guys with more interesting stories in the upcoming episodes.